Okay, it's Hugh Hewitt. We have 430,000 cases of the virus across the globe. It's killed 19,000 people. I will bring you updates as they occur. But, of course, there's good news as well. The Senate has approved a $2.2 trillion coronavirus bill aimed at slowing the economic free fall. That is the headline on the Washington Post. Here is Senator Mitch McConnell on his finest hour on the Senate last night announcing its passage, cut 22.
This $2 trillion rescue bill to save American individuals, small businesses, large businesses, and to provide considerable funding for the healthcare workers and the scientists and the doctors and others who are trying to solve this pandemic. So I think if I were writing your headline, I'd say the Senate has pivoted from one of the most contentious, partisan periods in the nation's history to passing this rescue package 100-0, all in one quarter of this year. From arguably the most partisan, divisive thing you could possibly do to coming together entirely, 100 of us, to meet this challenge, I think says a lot about the United States Senate as an institution, our willingness to put aside our differences to do something really significant for the country. I think one of the reasons that happened is we're inspired by what's going on around the country. People are helping each other, reaching out, looking for ways to make a difference, following the directions of the healthcare professionals. This is a proud moment for the United States Senate and for the country, and we're going to win this battle in the very near future.
Mitch McConnell's finest hour. It is. And it's the Senate finally overcame. The Democrats retreated in the face of outrage across the country. Now, the president has risen too. He's doing very, very well. I cannot believe the reports. I refuse to believe reports that networks are not going to carry his press conferences. That would appear to everyone to be simply because some producers don't like the fact his numbers are up. But he's leading well from the front. How do you lead in a time of crisis? I'm devoting the rest of this hour to my conversation with Dr. Larry Arnn, Part 2, on how Lincoln and Churchill led. Part 3 will play tomorrow. Dr. Arnn, of course, the president of Hillsdale College. Then, next hour, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo joins me. I'll be joined by Dr. Michael Oren. I'll be joined by others. But let's listen to Dr. Larry Arnn talking about leadership in a time of conflict and crisis. Let's begin by telling about the attitude that Lincoln adopted as he governed. His picture, and I sat next to George W. Bush once in the Oval. He had a half dozen talk show hosts, and he pointed to the picture of Lincoln, and he said, 41 is in my heart, but that man is in my head. What did he mean by that? He was in war at that point. It was the surge. What did he mean by that?
Well, Lincoln, was sort of like, for different reasons, like Churchill, was the last guy in the world to divide the country and summon the whole strength of the country, North and South, pitted against each other. And that was a terrible trial to him, and it wrecked him. And he might have been, if he hadn't been shot, 6 days after the Southern surrender at Appomattox, he might have had a few good years, which he really didn't get, And so it was a terrible thing. But Lincoln was extremely effective because if you just picture the situation, when Lincoln is inaugurated president, first of all, he's never run a big thing in his life. He has a little bit of war experience in a fight with the Black Hawk Indians, and the Capitol is pretty much surrounded by secession talk, Virginia and Maryland, and the Southerners have seceded, besieged a federal fort, and they have ambassadors. He talks about this in the first inaugural, waiting to talk to him to, settle between two separate nations. And he didn't have an army, and he didn't really have a way to get one. All he could do is call for troops, and he didn't know if any would come. And, he called for 75,000, which seemed an astronomical number, But by the end of the war, that seemed like a tiny number. We didn't really have a military establishment. It's sort of like in the Revolutionary War. There weren't a lot of people around who knew how to fight a big war. I mean, we'd had the Mexican War, and North and South, the leading generals, had fought beside each other against the Mexicans in that war. But that was the experience that we had, and not as big as this is going to turn out to be. He offered the command of the Union of the Washington, D.C. forces. There were not overall Union forces at that time, to Robert E. Lee, who thought about it a couple of days and thought about taking it, and then didn't. And so he became the great commander of the other side, a very consequential fact in the war. And so the war went badly. You know, how would he, you know, the early battles were terrible. And Lincoln, you know, I read this morning thinking about this. What did he do after the first battle of Manassas or Bull Run, where, you know, it's fought in the environs of Washington, D.C., and some people had gone out to have a picnic in a high place from D.C. and watched the battle, and the Northern troops were routed, and most of them ran all the way back to Washington. And so that just looks disastrous. And that's the theme of Lincoln in the war. He doubled down every time. He wrote a letter after Manassas of things that need to be happening right now, and he sent it to the old man, General Winfield Scott, a Mexican War veteran, and you know, he soon replaced him too with somebody more vigorous, but who didn't work out, McClellan. Oh, that's another thing. The generals didn't work out for a long time. Then he found Grant, and that changed things. But at that time, Grant, the really great author Bruce Catton, if you want to read a history of the Civil War, it's an older one, but it's called the Centennial History of the Civil War by Bruce Catton, who was an Ohio journalist. And, you know, back in those days, the journalists from Ohio used to be intelligent.
Oh, I saw that. I blocked that jab. I was ready for that.
There you go. Yeah. It's really great, and he describes how Lincoln acted, and he says after the Battle of Antietam, there was only 2 battles fought on northern soil. The first one to a draw, the second one the South was defeated, and Antietam is in Maryland, outside Washington D.C. And the commanders, they fought, and it is actually the greatest number of casualties in a day in American history. About 25,000 people died, more than any single day at Gettysburg. And so then the Southern Army goes back down, and it's been bloodied, and of course it wasn't as able to replace its losses as the North was. And Lincoln called for more troops, and Catton writes, and this is a paraphrase, but it's close. So the war expanded to a place that no one had foreseen, but also it narrowed down to 2 people, Lincoln and Lee, who had the awful ability to make men love them and the ruthlessness to tell them what to do.